Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. Today we have Ted Santos. He has a disruptive leadership model. He wants to disrupt things, wants to blow things up. Not really blow things up, but he thinks leaders need to cause problems to be able to teach their people better how to solve problems. And we actually have a great conversation here. I think you're going to gain a lot. There's some really meaty stuff. It's like a whack across the side of the head. That was a book by somebody else many years ago. But Ted's got some thinking that's out of the box and can really help you go to that next level if you're willing to look at yourself and think, hey, maybe I've got some limitation on myself that I shouldn't have in place. Maybe I need to think of things differently. And he's got some ideas on how to do that. Let's dive in. Ted, welcome to the show. I wanted to ask you, you teach disruptive leadership. I think of a lot of people who can disrupt things, but you mean this in a positive sense. I know that. So
Sure.
Why don't you tell the audience, at least give us a tipping point here. What are you talking about with disruptive leadership?
Sure. So first, thanks for inviting me to your show. It's a pleasure to be here. And I look forward to having a conversation. And before I dive into disruptive leadership, perhaps I should say a lot of things that I would say with regard to disruptive leadership may appear to be counterintuitive. So I'll ask that your audience be prepared for a ride, a journey into perspectives that may not be part of the everyday way of doing business.
Good. I like that. Matter of fact, many, many years ago in the early 1980s, like 82, 83, 84, there was a guy named Roger Van Auck from Creative Think, and he wrote a book called A Knock on the Side of the Head or something like that. So it sounds like that's what you're going to give the audience today, so I'm all for it. Let's go for it.
So I would say that disruption is an important part of business and part of life. If you're the CEO and you are not intentionally creating problems, you should be fired or retrained immediately. And I'm saying that because if you look at many of the great leaders that have created disruption, initially it looked like something that was impossible and we don't know how to do. And perhaps I can tell you, I personally have some experience with this. I'm 5'6", I weigh 143 pounds. I was dunking basketballs. I was starting defensive nose guard. Not only did I just start, I broke records in solo tackles, and I put guys out of the game. I'm talking the fullback, 6'1", 235, all-state running backs, 6'4", 225, and that guy went to the NFL, but I sent them out on a stretcher. I've broken ribs on people, and as I said, school record for solo tackles. I was a really good defensive nose guard. And I'll say that happened because of a mindset that I developed. And it's not like I just woke up one day or I took a course or I was knocked on the head or something. Well, maybe I was, but but it was a mindset that I developed, and it wasn't on purpose. When I was 6 years old, I literally witnessed my mother running with 2 broken legs, and that altered my life forever. I didn't know her legs were broken at the time. I don't think she did either. And it was purely an accident. What happened? It was a car accident. In fact, it was New Year's Eve. She took her, I'm the oldest I was 3 at the time. She took us to her mother's house for New Year's Eve party. I don't know what time we left. I'm sleeping. And the only reason we were in the front seat is because she drove her brother and his wife home and put us, her children, in the front. And about 100 yards from home, the car is wrapped around a tree. I look at my brother and sister, we're bloody, we're crying, and I look at my mother and she's gone. I'm just tall enough to see over the dashboard, and I watch her run. No limp, no crawl, no hesitation. Bang, she just takes off, and in minutes, my father and his cousin take us to the hospital. And later I learned that she had 2 broken legs and a broken arm. And my mind then went immediately to human beings must have something, and we don't ordinarily know how to get it. So I'm going to go after that. I'm going to train. So at 9, I started studying human behavior. At 11, I started working out, push-ups, sit-ups, and I broke records in all the sports that I was in, including track and field. So I was training for something, and I had this mindset of running with broken legs. That's what I was after. How do you get this thing out of you that's there and it's part of humans? And interestingly, I transferred that same mindset into running businesses and then now in advising executives to do things that's not normal.
That's really interesting. I love the story. And it's quite an image to think of someone running with two broken legs. I've heard things, you've probably read them, of someone getting like superhuman strength, being able to lift a car up so somebody can get out.
Exactly.
And I mean, the human body is amazing. And so I get very concerned when scientists feel that they can become like God and create people or create pieces of people, and where this can go. We don't have to go down there. But that's very disruptive. But I am curious. So at a young age, you really thought of this disruptive model without probably having that term.
Right.
What barrier were you thinking? You brought up your size. There's nothing wrong with your size, but you brought up your size compared to what you wanted to do. How did you kind of realize, here's the status quo belief about somebody my size? Couldn't be a defensive nose guard, if I remember your position correctly.
Right.
And then taking on guys who are much larger. Was that your weight, 160, when you were going against a guy who was 220?
I was 143, and I went against guys at 250.
Wow. And so what happened there? What enabled you to think out of the box instead of being held down? And maybe that's the wrong term, but just held back, maybe limited.
Perfect. So I was the second fastest on the team. The quarterback was the only one faster than me. I was the hardest hitting guy because the way I trained my body. I was born in the house that had weights. My father was a big guy, and so was my brother and all of my uncles. They're all big guys. I'm the anomaly. So,
okay, but you had a big heart.
But not on the field. I was taking hearts. So training and all that, my father had this bicep, but anyway, playing. So I was a hard-hitting guy on the football field. And in one of the games, I watched the running back coach yelling at the top of his lungs at the head coach and saying, "Why don't you have Santos in there playing running back?" Because without question, I had the best moves on the field, and I wasn't playing. I was on the bench. And so I went home that night and said, I have to put an end to this. I'm a senior and I'm playing. And that means I have to do something that is so incredible and undeniable. What am I going to do? I'll play nose guard. So I went into practice the next day, and the first string offense was running plays, and whoever was playing defense, I said, "Hey man, take a break." And I proceeded to destroy our center in the offense. In fact, our center said to me when he got down, he said, "Hey, Teddy, this is just practice, man. You don't have to play so hard." But I was auditioning for the job, and at the end of practice, the coach said, "Teddy, do you want to play nose guard?" And I said, "Yeah."
So what I've had to learn the hard way, Ted, I'm curious whether this struck you at a young age, took me a lot longer, was the difference between playing hard and playing smart. So with your size and probably quickness, did you discern that you had to focus more mentally on the game, how to gain an advantage versus because physically you couldn't be the biggest guy on the field?
Right.
So you had to play smarter. It's interesting. Wayne Gretzky, has that statement about other people are going where the puck is. I'm going to go where the puck's going to be.
Exactly.
Gretzky's not that big of a guy.
Right.
So, I mean, but how did this affect you? And were you aware of that? That you were thinking, with team sports, I think so much, with so many sports, so many competitive activities, a lot of the competitive edge is anticipation, which comes down to thinking. Can you figure out what's going to happen next? Anyway, I'm talking too much.
No, it's a good point because I also played running back. I could read the backfield, and sometimes I would obliterate the running back who was supposed to get the ball. So now there's a broken play. So I could read it, or if the guy's running a sweep, I could catch him in the backfield. I could get off the ball and get into the backfield and cause chaos. I was disruptive.
Yeah, so you figured it out, but did you realize that you were playing more to your smarts, although still being in top physical condition?
Yeah, and no, the answer to your question is no, and there was also a bit of recklessness on my part. Like there was this, you've heard of people saying getting to a flow state?
Yeah, yeah.
So it was like I was in a flow state. So wanting to run with broken legs was to get into a flow state, and I had already trained for the game. Even though I never trained for nose guard, I was an athlete. I was extremely athletic. I mean, I'm dunking basketballs, right? So I had great leg drive. So to intentionally get into that flow state and be prepared for the game, I was able to exploit the other team with quickness, with hard hitting, and understanding the backfield.
I'm curious, and don't let me cross any lines here, okay? But I'm curious, it sounds like you had a dad that you were close to. You had a brother who was bigger than you. Your dad was big. Did your dad mentor you, train you at all on how to get in shape? It sounds like you did a lot of calisthenics. Your dad also had weights, so maybe at some point you picked up on the weights. But did he mentor you at all? And if so, what was that like?
So you know what my father did really well is he taught my brother and I great problem-solving skills. So my father could take a car engine apart and put it back together. So we were always working with our father. And so we learned to do so many things and my father had all kinds of tools. We knew how to balance tires, we had tons of tools. And we know how to do anything. So, even with me in a car, something went wrong, I would just get under the hood. I figured out how to rebuild a carburetor back before fuel injectors. But it was all because of my father and the problem-solving skills that he constantly trained. But my father also did something else that I think affected. He loved wrestling with my brother and I. And because he was bigger, and I'm the oldest, he was, for a while, able to take both of us. He could handle both of us. But when I turned 16, my brother and I had the perfect synchronization, and we got my father. He never wrestled us again after that. But my brother was like 6'2", 225. I mean, my father was easy 225. He literally picked my father up one day over his head and so my brother was really strong. Yeah. But having the weights, my father would brag to his male buddies about how strong now let me tell you about my son's watch. And he'd tell me, go to the bench press and watch him. No, don't help him. You watch, you'll see, watch how strong he is. So we had that kind of reinforcement. We were splitting logs for the fireplace, and we'd do that for hours. So there were lots of things, physical activity, problem solving that he had us do. And I don't know if you call that mentoring, but that was kind of play for us in some ways.
No, I definitely do. Were there ever times where he wanted you to do some of those things and you were like, Dad, come on, I want to go hang out with my buddies. I want to go play basketball. I want to go do whatever.
Our father was pretty strict. You didn't really do that.
No, but I understand. But did you ever... So you either knew not to do it, or if you asked it, it was told, no, this is the time we're going to do this. Is that right?
We just did it. I mean, so let me give you, splitting logs, it was like, sons, come on, we're going to go split logs. That was fun for us. We'd literally be out there for hours just splitting logs. It took 3 hours to cut the lawn. So you just did it. Yeah, you just did it. I did it one weekend, my brother did it the next. So, my father didn't do it. Yeah, I mean, we had a huge pool in the first year we moved there. That was, none of us knew what to do. So that might have been a little more frustrating. Maybe I didn't want to do it, but I had to help. He had us do it.
Yeah. Interesting. So I just brought it up because I want the audience to hear a lot of leadership lessons apply as parents. And
yeah,
in this concept of, one aspect of being a great parent, of course, you need to be loving and patient, but having regular meals together, and then also really having your kids do chores and you do them with them.
Right.
So it's not, you go weed that hillside. It's, we're going to go weed that hillside. We're going to go chop that wood up. We're going to go work on the car. That's where you have interactions. That's where you teach responsibility, quality.
Absolutely.
So many good attributes, right? I mean, those are probably great memories for you.
They are. And I do know that, watching my father take responsibility for certain things, when I was an executive, I remember saying, if this doesn't work, I'm responsible. But I didn't think my father, but it was sort of, it was engraved in my brain to just be responsible.
Yeah. And he also taught you quality. And I would just encourage leaders to think about, because you're already transitioning to leadership when you just made that comment, that, if you want your people to grow, you've got to have somebody spending time with them, doing certain things together,
Absolutely.
not just go watch the video.
So I can actually give you another personal story that probably prepared me more for leadership than anything else in my life. It was being thrown in the fire of leadership. So at 21, and now there are 4 children, I lived in a different state to go to college. My family was here in Jersey, and I received a phone call that I no longer have parents. So I go home, and I'm the oldest of 4. I'm 21, my brother's 19, and my sisters are 12 and 16. And there are many things that have to be done. And as you said, I need to take care of the emotional well-being of my siblings. I didn't think anyone can do a better job. In fact, at some point, I had my youngest sister come live with me in DC, and I found a great private school and all those things. So because I didn't think, as good as my relatives were, I knew my parents had a vision, and I didn't want it to die with them. I knew they had a vision for their children's education and all that stuff. So I wanted to keep that alive. But when the death immediately happened, I learned a lot. I learned about leadership in the face of chaos, because that was a chaotic situation. It was unexpected. I learned how to coach people up. I learned how to delegate. And those all became transferable into my professional life. And the way I coached my sisters up, my brother had a full ride scholarship for football, so we took him off to college. And now, even though my sisters were living with my father's sister, I still needed their support, because I had to learn to do things I had never done. This is an unprecedented for me. So I would ask my sisters to do things, and I knew they didn't know how. So I knew I was sending them on a mission to fail, and they did. And they'd come back to me and say it didn't work. Okay. I'd ask them some questions, and they say, okay. And they'd go and they'd fail again, and they'd come back. And instead of me telling them what to do or go watch the video, I would ask them questions, and eventually they'd accomplish it. But what was happening is they were developing a new way of solving problems through my questions. So if I would have just told them to do it, it would have handicapped them, and they forever would have been coming back to me for the answers. So that allowed me to ask them to do first simple things and then more complex things. And over time, they started volunteering for things, and I was even surprised. So in my professional life, that's exactly what I did. When people would come to me and say, Ted, I have a problem. What should I do? Well, what would you do if I wasn't here? I'd go to Mike, the president. Well, you can't go to him anymore. So let's talk about that. Well, I do this, this, and this. Okay, well, what about this and this? Didn't think about it. So they go off And then they come to me another time, I have a problem. I already know you're going to ask me this long list of questions, and I've thought them all through, and here's where I'm stuck. And I'd ask them another question. They say, I didn't think of that. And they're going. Eventually, they stop coming to me. And that one guy said, hey, Ted, just want to let you know, 2 weeks ago, we had this disastrous problem. Partly our fault, partly the client's fault. And here's how I handled it. Didn't blame the client. I took care of it. And the way I took care of it had the client pick up the phone, call one of their clients, and send them to us. So now my operations team is getting new business for the company. My operations team is a competitive edge for the organization. And when I started telling the sales team, this is the operations team we have now, they started using those case studies to close deals. They were like, man, we've got a special forces operations team here. So just by asking questions instead of telling them what to do, it took a little bit longer, but eventually you could say I disrupted my role and made myself obsolete, which then allowed me to say, how can technology make us obsolete? What are untapped revenues we can get from existing clients or new clients? So it allowed me to look at new possibilities. And the president of the company now was at the helm of the ship instead of in operation solving those tough problems. And we moved from 3,200 square feet to a 50,000 foot warehouse that allowed us to now have completely new services that we couldn't have had in the past. But it's really getting your people to be self-contained and not depend on you for every move.
Well, I think you're bringing up other things also. So I would disagree, although I understand your meaning that you made yourself obsolete as a leader. I think that what I've seen in my coaching, consulting, and in my own behavior, so I got to own my stuff too. And quite frankly, if somebody says how to do this, I'm a type A, high D personality. It's like, okay, do it this way. It's faster, it's easier.
Right.
And I typically think I'm correct, although I've learned to realize maybe I'm not correct, so I should ask questions. So it's just boom, done, I can move on to the next thing. And I have to force myself to learn the habit to ask questions or to suggest things versus be directive. Do this, do that. And that's a challenge. Have you worked with a leader who struggles that way, where they agree with the concept,
right?
But then how did they develop the habit, a better habit that overcame the bad habit of just answering the question, boom, instead asking questions and developing?
I had to be that for them. So, and just let me say, making yourself obsolete is making yourself obsolete in a role that allows you to elevate yourself in the organization and work on bigger things. So when they had a big enough problem, they would say, Ted, the client needs to speak to you. We've exhausted everything we could do, and they want to speak to you now. That was rare. So that I made myself obsolete for solving problems. That was their job. My job was to create problems for them to solve. And that's what I really wanted to be, the problem creator, not the problem solver.
Well, and qualify what you mean by problem. So what I'm guessing, assuming, thinking is that when you say problem, you're talking about growth problems, process improvement problems. You're talking about positive problems versus, as a leader, you're not creating problems you're not creating drama, unnecessary drama.
Right.
You're not breaking something just for the fun of it.
You're not walking around with a white glove and saying, hey, there's dust on the desk. That would be kind of petty.
You're not being irritating. Yeah.
Right. It's like I'm declaring, John F. Kennedy said, we'll send a man to the moon before the end of the decade. How do you do that? We don't know how to do that. So there's no blueprint for it, except once it's accomplished, it alters the future for everyone. And then there are all these other things that you learn from that one possibility that you didn't see would happen.
Yeah. And I think you just brought up something else that really struck me when Kennedy said that, and we use that in a guide that we wrote on how to define targets or goals, that would it be amazing if we had a leader stand up today and say, by the end of this decade, we're going to once again be the United States of America instead of the divided states of America. We're going to stop focusing on what divides us, and we're going to start focusing on what we have in common and what we all agree on. That would be an amazing vision. But for any leader to lay out that vision, which could be called a problem, but that is, and I know you and I have talked before, and you brought up Steve Jobs and Jobs with the iPod, where he laid out, what if we didn't have the Walkman or whatever with its limitations? What if we had this thing? And I'm sure that when he first brought up the idea, assuming it was him that brought it up, that's my understanding.
Right.
It must have really kind of shocked people in a similar way to Kennedy's proclamation.
How do we do it? What is he talking about? In fact, have you ever heard of a gentleman by the name of Robert Goddard?
Sounds familiar, but vaguely. Doesn't piece me in.
Aeronautics engineer in the 1920s. He said, one day we will send man to the moon. And the New York Times had a problem with that comment. So they decided to write an article about how much of an idiot he was, and he didn't have the intelligence of an elementary school student, and this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. In 1969, they had to write another article to apologize.
Well, it isn't the first time the New York Times has made a mistake. But we don't have to do a podcast on that either. But I love what you're saying. So there's a lot of different things going through here, Ted. And one of the key things you brought up with is the disruptive model. So thinking outside the box. And so I'm wondering if you have an example of a client that came to you, whether their business was not doing well, or maybe it was doing reasonably well, but they wanted to take it to another level.
Yes.
And they were stuck in a belief system that was, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this, or however you want to word it. And you helped break them out of that glass box.
So I have a client that is in consumable goods, and their grandfather started the company in 1930, retail storefront. Their father came in as the son-in-law, and he took it to its next level and started selling to the commercial retail world. And then the grandsons of the founder, there are two of them, they drive this business to its next level with, more retail and more technology so that they're more efficient. They can produce huge volumes, and they're growing. They're doing well, as you're saying. This is not a company that's stuck. But there was something they wanted to do, but they just could never get to it. It was an idea. So when I sat down with one and asked what would be a breakthrough, for some of my clients, the breakthrough is knowing what the breakthrough is. You'd be surprised. A lot of people confuse improvement and incremental results with breakthroughs. So it's part of our paradigm. If I can do more of this, but do this better or do it differently, but that's the more, better, or different. Breakthroughs are these possibilities you don't know how to do, except once accomplished, it alters your future. So when he and I sat down, we had a conversation that there are products you're not making. So you guys have been making products under your brand for decades. There are products you're not making, and they're unlike anything you've made. And we asserted there was $12 million in untapped revenue with existing clients. So we put up a strategy to go after that, and they created a new division called the co-pack division, which was going to make items that were unlike what they made, and they would make it for the clients, and perhaps it would be under their brand name or under the client's brand name. And what they did is they did some of that, but they also had someone come in who was making this product, and they wanted to just go out and sell, and they wanted to hire a co-packer to make it so they didn't have to deal with that. And instead of hitting that number 12 million, we came much closer to 20 million, and it drove about 25% to the top line. But what it did is it was disruptive because they had to use machinery they had never used. They had a facility. They had all the certifications that qualify them for a top tier manufacturer, but they had to buy new equipment. They had to retrain their people. And, they had to, I don't want to say crawl before they walked, but you're training people on machinery they've never used. So initially productivity, let's say the first 30 days, wasn't impressive. But once the people came together, it was amazing. But what it also did is allowed them to then go make another different product and another different and another. And their facility just constantly churned out the same things. All they had to do was change a flavor or change. It was, they always knew what they were doing. But now this is like your Navy SEAL team who are being disrupted because every day they may be making a completely new product for a very different client. And that's a very different mindset. It's disruptive to the organization because it's easier to keep churning out the same things. So that disruption drove top line, but it also changed their brand in the marketplace to people who can do things that are, really complex.
It's interesting. Yeah, when you talked about the major objective, I forget the term you used, but I think of the book, The One Thing. I think of Jim Collins with BHAGs, Big Hairy Audacious Goals.
Right.
And I'm struck when you talk about they had to set up a separate division because, if your grandfather started the business and then your father, who was the son-in-law, came in, took it over, ran it, and then you jumped into the business, that's really all you know. And you've got some limitations because that's all you know. But there's a lot of risk bringing in somebody from the outside also. So it's one thing to bring in a consultant, kind of a catalyst, like you might have come in and been a catalyst.
Right.
But you also can't turn over the reins. And then I was struck by the thought, going back to Steve Jobs again, that when the Macintosh team started, they were in a separate building. They had a pirate flag flying above it. This was a skunk works.
Right.
And all you knew was the pirate flag and something was going on. And so it's interesting. And currently I work for Blackpoint Cyber, which has great cybersecurity software. But my boss, Mike Estep, used to run an IT managed service provider.
Okay.
And we sell through managed service providers. But sometimes they'll say to them, well, I've hit this level of business. I want to grow my business. And Mike has been an MSP that was 10 million. He then went with a roll-up group called Blue Alliance that was 130 million, 1,300 employees, and he was CEO. So, he knows his stuff. He says something really interesting. He says what you're saying. He says, well, in a vein, he says, if I was doing an MSP today, if I had one, I would let that one continue as is.
Right.
But I would start another MSP. I'd hire new staff. I'd use all new tools because there's all this tech debt with tools that are used today, and they have some lack of productivity aspects to them and cost and whatever. I'd start a new one from scratch and apply what I know, and I would pilot. And I think you've indicated you didn't use the term, but what they did was they tested some things.
Right.
And I would build that up, and if it got to a certain level, then I'll take the old one and merge it into it. If it fails, I shouldn't lose anything. I should know enough to maintain my cost from okay. But I would do a skunk works. It's kind of interesting how important that is if you really want to do what you're talking about, disruptive leadership.
Right.
That you may have to do something on the side. You may have to. Have you ever had a client that either by themselves or with a small team kept the thing going that they had going, but you helped them figure out this disruptive idea, and they started a skunk works either by themselves or with a small team that was so many hours a week. Like in the One Thing book, he says they decided what he would do that would be the one thing that would make everything else easier or unnecessary. And then he spent 20 hours a week on that project until it was done. And that's what catapulted Keller Williams Real Estate. Have you ever had a client that did that?
Well, the one we're talking about, I mean, that's what they had. At the time, their father bought a facility, a plant. They outgrew it and bought a plant that was about 4 times that size. And the original plant was kind of a ghost town. It had a little bit of productivity at night. And so they had the facility. It was a wasting asset in some ways, right? It wasn't productive. So by using it to create new products, they put it back to work, and now this place was hopping all over again.
Yeah.
So what they took people from, they had all these employees already, so they just took people and said, you're going to work on this. Very different. And you get a little pushback. Why are we doing this? We never work on what's this machinery we're using? And so, you get a bit of that. But once you train those people, and we're functioning in a new paradigm here. So what we've always done, we're not making any of that. We're making new stuff. And so the people trained and they understood the vision of the CEO. So they would actually sometimes say, just tell us what you want. Tell us the numbers you want us to hit, and we'll just go do it.
Love it. Love it. So I'm going to do something I like to do to my audience. So Ted, you've done a great job of getting everybody amped up on the disruptive leadership model.
Okay.
So what would be the key advice you would give them? And even though it's in the notes, I want you to remind them if they want to learn more about what you're doing, because this is great stuff. We've covered some amazing stuff. I mean, if people did what you've discussed today, it would totally transform lives in positive ways. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to leave them wanting more, and they need to go check out what you're doing. So what do you got to say to close this out?
So looking for the top 3 ways, the 3-step program to get this done that's not transformation. You can get lots of improvement from doing that. But if you're looking for breakthrough transformational growth, you cannot be afraid to transform yourself first. I think I told you I used to do CEO roundtables where middle market, 100 million to $1 billion in revenues were the young CEOs, and the older ones were former CEOs of Fortune 500s. And I had a guy come in and say he was great at turnaround and driving revenue. And he was brought into a company that had problems. He got rid of a bunch of people, brought in some of his own, and it still was not transforming the culture. So he brought someone in and said, look, fix my people. They need to transform. And it still wasn't working. So someone sat him down and said, well, if you want to transform the culture, it might have to start with you. And so he took that on, and then the rest of the culture followed with him.
Yeah.
So, and he said it was a valuable lesson that whenever he was brought into a company and he believed the culture needed to transform, it was he who had to transform first. So the first investment had to be in himself so that he could facilitate transformation and create an environment that supported that. And most times when you're looking at breakthroughs and transformation, you're creating new paradigms. And in those new paradigms, you're going to have language that doesn't support the old one. You and I talked about this a bit. I said, take an example. You can have 4 guys who all play basketball. They're all good. And one guy is really good, and he plays because he wants to get the girls. And he does. He gets the girls. He showboats, whether it's on the high school or college team or on the playground, and he gets the girls. The next guy says, I want to make it to the NBA. And he makes it. He even plays sometimes. And then the third guy says, I'm going to be a starting NBA player. And you know what? This guy trains to start, and he does. And then you get the last guy. And that's the guy who we call Michael Jordan or LeBron James. And their paradigm has its own language that's distinguishable from the others. And it sounds more like, I am going to be the greatest player to ever play the game. I'm going to break every single record. So the guy who wants to get the girls is not training like the guy who wants to break every single record. So they're different mindsets. So they're not 3-step programs. It's a mindset. There's something you want to accomplish. There's this future you want to create for yourself. And just doing more, better, or different of the same thing won't get you there. So as a leader of an organization, there's a future you want to create, and it's not something that you know you can do, and it's not a pipe dream either. Sort of like Henry Ford said, I want to create an automobile that most people can afford. And out of that comes the assembly line that allowed him to do something that no one else had done. But his future, his declaration for the future was, I'm going to make a car that most households can own. And by 1927, most households owned an automobile. And he was charging, I think it was $247. But to another point you made, once he achieved that, he didn't create a new future. He kept trying to make the automobile cheaper in general. And at that time, he had 60% of the market share. So by him fulfilling this vision that he said most households will own an automobile, done. And he kept working on that. So GM said, well, if you want a car that's not just black, I can do that for you. I can make different models. And so by the 50s, GM had 60% of the market share. Ford, that's a great example, especially you were bringing up this nation. Once you reach that future that you set out to create, if you don't create a new future, you kind of are just spinning your wheels. So, and you may have to transform again, and that transformation will have to start at the top.
Yeah, it's interesting too with the 4 basketball players you brought up. The guy who wants to go after the girls is thinking short term, really.
Right.
The guy who wants to make it to the NBA, the guy who wants to be a starting whatever position in the NBA, those are okay goals.
Right.
That may be fulfilling.
Right.
But the key thing you don't want is you don't want to set one of those goals and then at a later time realize, I really should have worked to be the best in the game. I really could have been a Michael Jordan, or one of these other superstars. So as a leader, there's an old saying, there's power in it, but for lack of guidance, the nation falls, but many advisors make victory sure. Getting advice from someone, you don't have to buy into it, but being open to advice can open doors for you. So that's great. So Ted, where can people connect with you, learn more about you? I really appreciate everything you've said on the show. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, hesitating because there was one question I never answered that you asked.
Go ahead.
You asked me about executives that were not comfortable asking questions. How did I get them there? And I said I had to be that person.
Yeah.
So I had a client, Wharton degree in finance, really smart guy. He was doing a roll-up, and he hired me in the month of February that year. And he said, what I figured, you're going to be a consultant. You're going to come in and you're going to tell me some things and give me some advice, and you're going to confirm everything I know. And at the end of the year, I'm going to say, see you later. Thanks a lot for confirming what I know. Great working with you. Goodbye. So
no ego.
So fast forward to December of that year, and he said, I need to tell you at least 2 important things. He said, I meet with you every 2 weeks for 2 hours, and every time I come to you and say, I have this problem and I need you to, help me solve it and give me some answers, you gave me no advice. You started asking me questions. And he said, and I have my retainer. I'm coming every month to give you a monthly retainer, and I'm paying a guy who won't give me any answers. He said he was becoming angry. Like, how can this guy not give me answers? He's making me figure it out myself he just keeps asking me question after question after question. And then I figured out, why do I need this guy? Like, this is a waste of my time. And then he said it hit him. Oh my God, you're asking me questions that I don't ask myself. No one in my organization is asking it. And it helps me see the problem from a new perspective. And then I solve it. And so he said, today I have a problem. I know you're going to ask me a lot of questions, so let's get to it. And he said, and by the way, that speech I had prepared to end the relationship, I'm not doing that now. And so you and I are going to continue working together. So he said, because I've learned a lot of things that I didn't anticipate I was going to learn.
I think I've said this many times, and I think we would be a much more powerful nation and have a much more healthier citizens if we taught people how to think. Critical thinking, we've taught people how to think instead of tried to tell them what to think in our schools, and just taught them, how do you look at facts? There are facts. How do you look at absolute truths? There are absolute truths. And how do you look at all this gray matter that's partial truths, exaggeration, sound, but how do you discern that? We'd be a much more powerful, healthy, prosperous, safe nation if people were coming from that place. And I love it that that's what you're teaching. I'm extrapolating out, but
no, it's
what I'm getting. That's what you're teaching.
Well, it's important because breakthroughs often have you go through lots of uncertainty and chaos. And those are the things we're educated to avoid, because as long as I'm an expert, I'm going to look really good because I know the terrain and I know the answers to the problems. But when you take someone in breakthrough territory, that's a domain where you're going to have problems you haven't encountered in the past. So it's uncertainty, it's chaotic, and this is one of the reasons so many breakthrough initiatives fail, because people are not skilled with navigating through the uncertainty and the chaos. And chaos itself isn't a problem. It's really mindset that does that. And if we took it to sports, if you took those 4 basketball players and the guy who starts and 3 defenders go to him, he passes the ball because that's a chaotic situation. But the mindset of a guy like Michael Jordan is, let me show you what I'm made of. I'm going to show you what I trained, why I'm Michael Jordan. So all 3 of you, come on, let's go. And there you go, I scored. That's a very different, but you train for that. So as executives, training a mindset to be able to navigate yourself and your people through the uncertainty so that you come out on the other side with a breakthrough.
Yeah, and one thing you did not say but somewhat alluded to was, when you got a problem with your people, most of the time most of the problem comes back to starting with you. It just does. And so if you can figure out yourself first, like you said, and get help doing that, that's great. Well, Ted, thank you so much for being on the show. You got a website or anything you want to direct people to?
Yes. You can find me on my website at turnaroundip.com. And IP is like intellectual property. And from there, you can contact me. But my website will tell you some things about me and what we do aside from what we've done here. So this was a great interview. Thanks a lot for inviting me.
Thanks for being here. It was a great interview, but it was a great interview because of you. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.